If you ever hear 3 soft knocks on your hotel room door, do not answer it. Because sometimes, the thing knocking isn't looking for a guest. It's looking for a soul. In the fall of 2025, I watched emergency workers perform CPR on a man dying in the hallway 3 doors down from my room. At 12:18 a.m., he flatlined, but less than 10 minutes later, the knocking started on my door, 3 times, and what I found out next made me realize, he never actually left that hallway. I want you to think, for a second, about the last time you stayed in a hotel. You checked in, you got your little plastic keycard, and the first thing you probably did was slide the deadbolt shut and flip the little privacy latch. It's automatic, we do it without even thinking, because a locked door, in our minds, is the difference between safe and not safe. That thin strip of metal is supposed to be the line the world can't cross. But that night in 2025 taught me something I still can't fully explain. Sometimes the lock isn't the problem. Sometimes what's outside your door has already stopped needing a way in. I was in town for a work conference. Nothing special, the kind of trip you've probably taken a dozen times. Business hotel, mid-tier chain, the kind with beige carpet and a mini fridge that hums a little too loud. My room was on the 4th floor, near the end of a long hallway. I remember it being quiet. Almost too quiet, if I'm honest, for a building with over 100 rooms in it. Around midnight, I was still awake, scrolling through my phone, when I heard raised voices out in the hall. Not shouting exactly, more like the urgent, clipped tone people use when something is wrong and they're trying to stay calm about it. Then footsteps, a lot of them. I got up, cracked my door, and that's when I saw it, a small crowd forming 3 doors down. And a hotel staff member on the phone, practically shouting the address to a 911 dispatcher. I'm not going to pretend I'm some kind of hero. I didn't run over and try to help. I stood in my doorway, half hidden behind the frame, and watched, the way people do when they know they probably shouldn't be watching but can't make themselves look away. A woman was kneeling over a man on the floor, pumping his chest in that rhythm we've all seen in movies but never really understand the horror of until you witness it firsthand. Paramedics arrived faster than I expected, maybe 6 or 7 minutes, and they took over compressions, snapped an oxygen mask on him, tried everything they had. At 12:18 a.m., I heard one of the paramedics say the words, "time of death." I remember checking my phone right at that moment, almost like some part of my brain wanted proof, wanted a timestamp, like I already knew I'd need to remember this later. They wheeled him out on a gurney with a sheet over his face. The hallway slowly emptied, the red and blue lights kept bouncing off the walls even after the ambulance doors closed. This strange, silent flicker with no siren attached to it anymore. And then, like nothing had happened, the hotel went back to being just a hotel. Housekeeping carts, ice machines humming, the ordinary sounds of a building full of strangers sleeping 15 feet apart from each other, never knowing each other's names. I went back inside, locked my door again, and told myself I'd try to sleep. I actually think I convinced myself I would be fine. That's the thing about trauma, though, it doesn't ask for your permission to show up. Less than 10 minutes later, at what must have been close to 12:30, I heard 3 knocks on my door. Soft, deliberate, not the fast, apologetic knock of a stranger who got the wrong room. Not the 2-knuckle tap of housekeeping. 3 slow, even knocks, spaced out like someone was making sure I heard each one individually. I froze. My first thought, the rational one, the one your brain reaches for because it doesn't want you to panic, was that it was hotel staff checking on guests after what had happened. Maybe they wanted to make sure everyone was accounted for. So I got up, walked to the door, and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. Not someone standing to the side, empty. Not shadow moving out of frame, empty. Completely, fully empty, lit by that dull amber hallway lighting hotels always seem to use. The kind that makes everything look slightly sick. I stood there for a solid 30 seconds, waiting for someone to step into view. Nobody did. I told myself it was the pipes. Old buildings settle, right? Sounds travel strangely through hotel walls. I've heard people explain away stranger things with less. So I went back to bed, propped up against the headboard because lying flat suddenly felt too vulnerable. And I tried to talk myself down. Then it happened again. 3 knocks. Same rhythm, same spacing. This time, I didn't just look through the peephole. I actually said, out loud, "Hello." No answer. I checked the peephole again. Empty hallway. My heart was doing something I can only describe as a slow, sick drumbeat. That specific kind of fear that doesn't spike and fade but instead just sits there, thick, in your chest. Here's where it gets into the part one still don't have a clean explanation for. I called the front desk, keeping my voice as steady as I could, and asked if maintenance or staff were doing room checks after the incident. The woman on the phone paused for a beat too long before answering. She told me no one from the hotel had been sent to check on guests. In fact, she said, security footage from the fourth floor hallway camera hadn't shown a single person walking past my door since the ambulance left. I want you to sit with that for a second. No one walking past on camera. And yet, 3 knocks. Twice. The next morning, I did what I imagine a lot of us would do. I looked it up. I searched the hotel's name, the incident, anything I could find, and I found a comment thread, buried in a local forum, from someone who claimed to have worked at that same hotel years earlier. They mentioned an old, half-remembered rumor among staff. Something about certain rooms on that floor being tied to more than one sudden death over the years. And about guests reporting knocking on the doors in the 10 to 15 minutes right after each one. I can't verify that. I want to be honest with you about that part, because I think honesty matters more than a tidy, satisfying ending. But here's what I can tell you. I checked out of that hotel almost 2 hours early the next morning. And to this day, I have never again gone to sleep in a hotel room without checking the peephole first. Without leaving a lamp on. Without listening, just for a second, before I let myself relax. So why does this story stick with people the way it does? I think it's because it touches something we don't like to think about too directly, the idea that death doesn't always leave cleanly. That the line between here and gone might not be as instant, as final, as we want it to be. We build our whole understanding of safety around thresholds, locked doors, closed curtains, deadbolts, the assumption that whatever happens in the world stays on the other side of that boundary. But what if some things don't respect that boundary the way we assume they will? What if the moment right after someone dies is somehow thinner, somehow more porous, than the rest of the night around it? I'm not asking you to believe in ghosts. I'm asking you to consider something smaller, something almost more unsettling, that we don't actually know what happens in those first few minutes after a life ends. Science can tell you about brain activity, about the body shutting down system by system, but none of that explains 3 knocks, spaced perfectly evenly, on a door in an empty hallway, 10 minutes after a man stopped breathing 3 doors away. Maybe it was grief playing tricks on a stranger's nervous system. Maybe it was pipes, or the building settling, or my own exhausted mind manufacturing patterns out of nothing. I've turned that possibility over more times than I can count, because it would be easier to accept. But I keep coming back to the same detail that refuses to let me fully believe that explanation. The hallway camera saw nothing. No person, no shadow, no movement at all. So the next time you check into a hotel room, late at night, in an unfamiliar city, I want you to remember this. Lock the door, yes, flip the latch, but understand that the lock was never really the point of this story. The point is what you do if you hear 3 knocks, soft and deliberate, in the 10 minutes after something has gone terribly wrong down the hall. Because some doors, once they're closed, might not be as closed as we think. If you were in that hallway that night, would you have opened the door? Or would you have done exactly what I did, and simply waited, in silence, for the knocking to stop? Let me take you back to that trip in Missouri, because I think if I skip the setup, you won't understand why what happened next hit me the way it did. I want you to picture a day so long it stops feeling like a day and starts feeling like an endurance test. I was on the road for work, running sales visits, and by the time the sun went down, I had knocked on the doors of 60 different leads. 60, not 60 phone calls, 60 actual, physical doors, 60 conversations, 60 small rejections and small wins stacked on top of each other from sunrise to sunset. If you've ever worked a job like that, you know the specific kind of tired it creates. It's not just your legs and your voice that are worn out. It's something deeper, something behind your eyes, a fog that settles in once your brain has spent the entire day performing on. Staying friendly, staying persuasive, staying switched on for total strangers who owe you nothing. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of the hotel that night, I wasn't thinking about anything except a hot shower and a bed. It was one of those smaller, independently run places, built to look like a log cabin lodge. The kind of spot you find just off a state highway in the Midwest. With exposed wood beams in the lobby and a fireplace that probably hadn't been lit in years. Charming, in a sleepy sort of way. The kind of place that feels like it belongs in a postcard. Not a horror story. I was given a room on the 3rd floor, the top floor of the building, and here's the detail that I didn't think twice about at the time, but that I have not been able to stop thinking about since. The floor was completely empty. Not quiet, not a few doors closed. Everybody already asleep, empty, no luggage carts in the hallway, no shoes outside doors, no muffled TVs playing through the walls. I walked the length of that hallway to my room and heard absolutely nothing except my own footsteps on the carpet. Here's a question I want you to sit with for a second. Because I think it applies to more than just hotels. How often do we mistake quiet for safe? We do it constantly. An empty parking garage feels safer than a crowded one. Until it doesn't. A silent house feels safer than one full of noise. Until you're the only person in it and every creak becomes a question mark. Quiet isn't the same thing as safe. Quiet is just quiet. And that night, in that empty hallway, I learned that lesson in a way I never wanted to. I got into my room, dropped my bag, and let the exhaustion take over almost instantly. I didn't even bother finishing my shower routine. I just wanted to sleep. But at 11:30 p.m., something pulled me back out of that half-asleep haze. Voices. Echoing down the hallway. Not screaming, not panic. Just that particular tone people use when something serious is happening and they're trying to keep their composure. Low and urgent and clipped. I told myself it was nothing. People argue in hotels. People get bad news on the phone in hotels. It's not my business, I thought, and I tried to go back to sleep. But my body had other plans. Because a little while later I got up for a glass of water. And that's when I stepped out into the hallway and saw something I don't think I will ever fully shake. 3 doors down, the door was wide open, light spilling out into the corridor, and 2 EMTs were on the floor, doing chest compressions on a man who looked to be somewhere in his 50s. I want to be honest with you about what that actually looks like in real life. Because television doesn't prepare you for it. It's not gentle, it's not quiet, it's aggressive, almost violent, a rhythm that looks like it should be too rough for a human body. Hands locked, full body weight pressed down again and again and again. And underneath all of that motion, there was this steady, high-pitched tone coming from a monitor. The flatline sound, the one we've all heard in movies but never really understand the horror of until it's happening 15 feet away from you in real life. In a hallway, at almost midnight, one of the EMTs noticed me standing there and, without even looking up from what he was doing, told me to get back in my room. Not rudely, just firmly, the way you'd expect someone doing that job to speak in that moment. So I did. I went back inside, closed the door, and locked it. And here's the thing I want to point out. Because I think it says something about how our brains try to protect us, I locked that door at 12:18 a.m. And in that moment, I genuinely believed I was locking the tragedy outside. I thought the door was the line between me and whatever was happening out there. I was wrong, completely wrong, but I wouldn't understand how wrong for another 32 minutes. I've told this part of the story to a few close friends since it happened. And almost every single one of them asked me the same question. Why didn't you just call the front desk right then? The moment you heard those voices. And honestly, that's a fair question, but I think it points to something we don't talk about enough. Which is how differently we behave when we're exhausted versus when we're rested. A well-rested version of me might have called downstairs immediately. But the version of me standing in that hallway that night had just spent 12 hours convincing strangers to trust him. Smiling through rejection after rejection, running on fumes and gas station coffee. Exhaustion doesn't just slow your body down. It slows down your judgment, your instincts, the part of your brain responsible for deciding what deserves your full attention and what doesn't. I think that's worth remembering, not just for ghost stories, but for life in general. Some of the worst decisions we make, or the slowest reactions we have, aren't because we're careless people. They're because we're running on empty. And running on empty makes everything feel like it can wait until tomorrow. So let's talk about what happened at 12:50 a.m. Because this is the part of the story where everything shifts. I had just started to drift off. That thin, fragile edge of sleep where your thoughts start to blur into something closer to dreaming. And that's when I heard it. 3 soft knocks on my door. Even, deliberate, spaced out, almost gently, like whoever was doing it wanted to make sure each individual knock registered before moving to the next. My first instinct, the rational one, the one your brain reaches for because panic is expensive and it doesn't want to spend that energy unless it absolutely has to, was to blame the building. Old plumbing, pipes contracting as the night got colder. I've heard people explain away stranger things with less. And honestly, in that half-asleep state, it was an easy story to believe. So I didn't move. I just lay there, listening, waiting for my heart rate to come back down. Then it happened again. 3 knocks. Same rhythm, but this time, louder, more insistent. And that's when the plumbing theory stopped holding up. Because pipes don't escalate. Pipes don't seem to notice whether you're paying attention or not. I got up. I want to tell you I did it calmly. But the truth is my hands were already shaking a little as I crossed the room. I looked through the peephole. And the hallway was empty. Fully lit by that dull amber hallway lighting that every hotel seems to use. The kind that somehow makes even a normal hallway look slightly wrong. No one there. No shadow ducking out of frame. Nothing. Here's where it stopped being something I could explain away. I stepped back from the door, telling myself it was over, that whatever it was done, and that's when I watched the door handle begin to slowly, silently depress, not fast, not forced, slow, careful, deliberate, the exact motion of someone who wants you to notice it happening. Who wants you to understand, on some primal level, that they are right there, close enough to touch the other side of that thin piece of wood separating you from them. At the exact same moment, the thin strip of light that had been glowing along the bottom of the door completely vanished. Gone, blocked out entirely, the way it only gets blocked when something, or someone, is standing directly in front of it, not walking past, standing, still, right there. I did not breathe. I don't think I moved a single muscle for what felt like an entire minute. Though it was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. And then I heard it, a faint, dry, scratching sound, dragging slowly across the wood of the door. Low, almost lazy, the kind of sound that doesn't match any human gesture I can think of. Not a knock, not a knuckle, something closer to fingernails, or maybe something that isn't fingernails at all, just moving, unhurried, across the surface between us. I keep coming back to that scratching sound, trying to describe it accurately, because I think the details matter more than the general impression. It wasn't fast, it wasn't frantic. It had this unhurried, almost curious quality to it. The way you might drag a fingertip along a surface you're inspecting rather than trying to break through. That, more than anything else, is what unsettled me the most. Fear, real fear, usually comes with urgency. A threat that's rushing toward you. A sound that's getting louder and faster. A shape moving quickly through the dark. This wasn't that. This was patient. This felt like something that had absolutely nowhere else to be. And all the time in the world to wait outside my door until I made a mistake. I want to be honest with you about something. Because I think it matters more than making myself sound brave. I am someone who has a concealed carry permit. I had a firearm in that room, locked in my bag, less than 10 feet away from where I was standing. And in that moment, none of that mattered. I couldn't move toward it. I couldn't move at all. There is a very specific, very rare kind of fear that doesn't just make you want to run. It makes running feel impossible. Like your body has decided, on some level deeper than logic, that movement itself is the dangerous choice. I have never felt that before that night. And I have never felt it since. So what did I do? The only thing I could do. I backed away from the door, turned on every lamp in that room, sat down on the edge of the bed, and stayed there, wide awake, staring at that door, for the rest of the night. I didn't check the peephole again. I didn't try to reason with whatever was on the other side. I just waited, in silence, watching that strip of light under the door, praying it wouldn't disappear again. Now here's a question I want you to think about. Because it's one I still don't have a clean answer to. Why 3 knocks? Why not 1? Why not a frantic pounding? Why not silence and just the handle turning? There's something about that number, 3, that shows up again and again across cultures, across religious traditions, across old superstitions passed down through generations. This idea that 3 carries a kind of weight, a kind of finality, a completion. I'm not a religious person, and I'm not asking you to be either, but I think it's worth noticing that whatever mechanism produced that sound seemed to understand the psychological power of that number. Whether that's coincidence, or something else entirely, I'll let you decide for yourself. Think about how many times the number 3 shows up in the stories we tell each other about the unexplained. 3 knocks, 3 warnings, 3 chances given before something happens that can't be undone. Even outside of ghost stories, we structure our own lives around 3s without even noticing it. 3 strikes, 3's a crowd, 3rd time's the charm. There's something in the human brain that treats the number 3 as a kind of threshold. The point where a pattern becomes undeniable. 1 knock is an accident. 2 knocks might be a coincidence. But 3 knocks, spaced out and deliberate, stops feeling random. It starts feeling like a message. And I think that's exactly why. Whether it was a person, a phenomenon, or something my own exhausted mind constructed out of grief and adrenaline, it landed the way it did. It didn't need to be loud to be terrifying. It just needed to follow a pattern my brain already understood as significant. Morning came, eventually, the way it always does. Indifferent to whatever you went through the night before. Around 6:30, once the sky had started to lighten just enough to make the hallway feel like a normal hallway again instead of a crime scene waiting to happen, I heard another door open, further down the hall. I looked out, and I saw a man step out of the exact room where I had watched the EMTs working just hours earlier. He looked to be in his mid-40s, dressed in business attire, a dark suit jacket, no tie, like someone getting ready for an early flight. But it was his face that stopped me. His eyes were deeply sunken, hollowed out in a way that looked less like a bad night's sleep and more like something that had been building for a long time, not tired in the ordinary sense. Hollow. I don't fully know what made me do it, but I asked him if he had been with the man who died. He paused, looked at me for a moment longer than felt comfortable, and then he smiled. Not a warm smile, a faint one, almost polite, the kind of smile you give someone when you know something they don't and you're deciding whether it's worth the trouble of explaining it. Then he said something I don't think I will ever forget. Word for word, there were 3 knocks, and the 3rd time was when they answered. They don't always leave immediately. He didn't wait for a response. He turned, walked toward the stairwell at the end of the hallway, pushed the door open, and disappeared down the stairs. I stood there for a long moment, replaying that sentence in my head, trying to make it mean something less unsettling than what it obviously meant. I never saw him again. I never found out his name, his room number, or how he was connected to the man who died. When I asked the front desk about him later that morning, they told me there was no guest matching that description checked into that hallway. I want you to sit with that detail the way I've had to sit with it for months now. Not, the guest checked out already. Not, we don't have that information available. No guest matching that description checked into that hallway at all. So let's step back for a second. Because I think there's something bigger buried underneath this story. Something worth talking through together instead of just letting it sit there as a scary anecdote. We build our entire sense of safety around thresholds, locked doors, closed curtains, the assumption that whatever happens on one side of a wall stays contained to that side. But what if some moments in life, specifically the moments right around death, are thinner than we assume? What if there's a window, some brief stretch of time, where the line between here and gone isn't as clean as we've been taught to believe? I'm not asking you to believe in ghosts. And I'm certainly not asking you to believe every word of this story as literal. Undeniable fact. What I am asking you to consider is something a little more uncomfortable, that we don't actually know what happens in the minutes surrounding someone's death. Medicine can tell you about the body shutting down, organ by organ, system by system. It can tell you about oxygen deprivation and the loss of brain activity. But none of that explains 3 knocks, spaced perfectly evenly, a door handle depressing in total silence. Or a stranger telling you, with total calm, that they don't always leave immediately. Here's my honest take, the perspective I've landed on after turning this over in my head more times than I can count. I don't think this story is really about ghosts. I think it's about the limits of what we're willing to admit we don't understand. We like clean explanations. We like our world sorted into real and not real, explainable and made up. But every single one of us, if we're honest, has had at least one moment where the explanation didn't quite fit. Where the rational answer felt thinner than the fear sitting in our chest. That gap, between what we can explain and what we actually experience, is where stories like this one live. And I think that gap is worth paying attention to, instead of rushing to fill it with whatever answer lets us sleep easier. So here's what I want you to walk away with tonight. The next time you're staying somewhere unfamiliar, somewhere quiet, somewhere that feels a little too empty for comfort, and you hear 3 knocks on your door in the middle of the night, I want you to remember this story. Not so you panic, not so you never travel again, but so you understand that the locked door was never really the point. The point is what you do in the minutes after you hear something you can't explain. When the hallway looks empty, and the light under the door disappears anyway. Because if that man was right, if some things really don't leave immediately, then the question isn't whether you locked your door. The question is whether you were paying attention to what happened right after. I still travel for work. I still stay in hotels. Sometimes one's just as quiet, just as empty, as that one in Missouri. And I won't pretend I've become fearless about it, because that would be a lie. And I promised you honesty over a tidy ending. What I've become instead is more attentive. I notice the little details now that I used to walk right past. An unusually empty hallway, a floor that feels a little too still for a building full of paying guests. The exact rhythm of a sound before I decide whether it deserves my attention or not. Maybe that's the real lesson buried in all of this. More than the ghost story itself. We spend so much of our lives moving on autopilot. Checking in, locking doors, falling asleep without really being present for any of it. It sometimes takes something we can't explain to remind us to actually pay attention to the world around us again. So I'll leave you with the same question that man's words left me with that morning in the stairwell. If you heard 3 knocks tonight, slow, deliberate, spaced out just enough to make sure you noticed each one, would you get up and look? Or would you do exactly what I did, and simply wait, in silence, for whatever was on the other side to decide it was done waiting too? Morning came, and with it, I thought I'd finally get some kind of answer. I thought daylight would do what it always does. Shrink the fear down to a manageable size. Turn the whole night into something I could laugh about over coffee. Instead, daylight handed me something worse than fear. It handed me math. I went down to the front desk before checkout, and I asked the clerk, as calmly as I could manage, about the room 3 doors down from mine. I wanted to know if the family of the man who died had been contacted. If there was anything the hotel could tell me, anything at all that might help me make sense of what I'd heard in the middle of the night. The clerk looked at her screen, typed something, paused, and then told me something that I have not been able to shake since. That room, she said, had been vacant, not recently vacated, not cleared out that morning after the incident. Vacant for days. The last guest had checked out nearly a week earlier. Nobody had been assigned to that room the entire time I'd been staying on that floor. I remember asking her to check again, because it didn't make sense with what I'd witnessed with my own eyes. The open door, the light spilling into the hallway, the EMTs on their knees doing compressions on a man who was very clearly, very physically present in that space. She checked again, same answer, vacant, and then she added something almost as an afterthought, something that turned my confusion into something closer to dread. Hotel occupancy that week was unusually low. And every single other guest on my floor had been assigned to rooms at the exact opposite end of the hallway from mine. Nobody, according to their system, had any reason to be anywhere near that room, or near mine, that night. I want you to really sit with that for a second, because I think it's easy to hear a detail like that and let it slide past you. An entire hallway, on the top floor of that hotel, and out of everyone staying there, I was placed at one end, and whatever happened, happened at the other end. In a room that officially had no one in it, not understaffed, not a paperwork mistake, vacant, on record, for days. So let's do the math together, because once I started laying it out, I couldn't stop seeing the pattern. 3 doors down, that's where I watched the EMTs working, that's where the voices had come from. 3 doors. The room number itself, when I finally worked up the nerve to check the little placard on that door the next morning before I left, contained the number 3, room 312, 3, 1, 2, a 3 sitting right at the front of it, like a signature. 3 knocks. not one, not a frantic string of pounding. 3. Spaced out, deliberate, twice in a row that night. And then there was what the stranger in the hallway told me. The man with the sunken eyes who vanished into the stairwell and left behind no record of ever having existed at that hotel. That the third time was when they answered. 3 knocks. Every single piece of this story, when you step back and actually count it, keeps landing on the exact same number, over and over again, like something was trying to make sure I understood the pattern even if I never understood the reason behind it. I am not a superstitious person by nature. I don't walk around avoiding black cats or refusing to walk under ladders. But there's a difference between superstition and pattern recognition, and what I experienced that night wasn't a vague feeling. It was a number, showing up in 4 completely separate, unconnected details, all converging on the same digit. I don't know what to call that, except deliberate. Here's the piece of this story that still, months later, keeps me up more than the knocking itself, more than the door handle, more than the scratching sound dragging across the wood that night. The front desk clerk was firm, almost defensive, when she told me that no guest matching that man's description, the sunken eyes, the business attire, the faint, knowing smile, had been registered anywhere in that hotel. Not in a room near mine. Not anywhere in the building. I asked her to check the security footage from that hallway. The same way I imagine you might have asked, if you were standing there in my shoes. She told me the footage showed the paramedics, showed the equipment being wheeled in and out, showed me stepping into the hallway and stepping back into my room. It did not show a man in a business suit stepping out of a vacant room and walking calmly toward the stairwell. As far as the camera was concerned, that conversation never happened. So I have to ask you the same question I've been asking myself ever since. Was it a trick of exhaustion? A hallucination built out of adrenaline and 12 straight hours of rejection and grief soaked into second-hand air? Was it some kind of electrical flicker in an old building? A shadow my exhausted brain filled in with a face and a voice because that's what exhausted brains do when they're desperate for an explanation? Or did I stand, close enough to touch, face to face with whatever it was that took that man 3 doors down from me? I don't have a clean answer for you. I wish I did. I think part of what makes stories like this stick with people isn't the scare itself. It's the not knowing, the fact that you're left holding a handful of details that don't resolve into anything tidy. We're wired to want closure. We want the story to end with an explanation we can file away and move on from. But real experiences, the kind that actually happen to real people in real hotel hallways, don't always come with that kind of ending. Sometimes you're just left with the math. And the math doesn't care whether it comforts you or not. Here's the part of this story I haven't said out loud to very many people. Because it's the part that makes me feel the most exposed. The worst part of that entire night isn't the fear. It's the gratitude. I feel grateful, genuinely, uncomfortably grateful, that the knocking only happened twice. Because everything about that night, the room, the number, the man's warning, points toward one specific, undeniable pattern. The third time is when they answer. And I know, with a certainty that I can't fully explain and don't particularly want to test, that if I ever hear a third set of knocks on a door late at night, I will not be the one who answers it. I think about that a lot now, more than I probably should. I think about how close that pattern came to completing itself in my room that night. And how thin the line was between 2 knocks and 3. I didn't do anything special to stop that third knock from happening. I didn't perform some kind of protective ritual. I didn't say the right words. I didn't do anything except sit frozen on the edge of a hotel bed with every lamp switched on. Whatever decided to stop at 2. It wasn't because of anything I did. And that's the detail that unsettles me the most when I really let myself sit with it. If it had been up to me, if my own actions were what determined whether that pattern completed itself, I think I'd feel some sense of control over what happened. Instead, I'm left with the uncomfortable truth that I got lucky. And I don't know why. So here's what I want to leave you with tonight. Because I think it matters more than just being scared for a few minutes and then closing this video and forgetting about it by tomorrow morning. The next time you're staying somewhere unfamiliar, somewhere quiet, somewhere just a little too empty for how many rooms it actually has, take a second before you fall asleep. Count the doors between your room and the stairwell. Notice the room numbers along the way. Pay attention to whether a hallway that should be full of strangers actually sounds like one. Because I don't think this story is really about ghosts. Not entirely. I think it's about how much of our safety depends on assumptions we never bother to check. That a hallway is as populated as it looks. That a locked door is the end of the conversation. That numbers are just numbers until the moment they aren't. Most of the time, those assumptions hold up fine. But every once in a while, for reasons we may never fully understand, they don't, and when that happens, all you're left with is whatever you noticed beforehand, and whatever choice you make in the handful of seconds after. So I'll ask you the same question that hotel room left me with. The question I still haven't been able to answer for myself. Have you counted the doors to your stairwell tonight? And if you hear 3 knocks, slow, even, deliberate, will you be ready to know which one is the last?